Nikki is Product Development Coordinator of CanAssist at the University of Regina. And Nikki, I'm going to hand the mic over to you. Welcome.
Sure. I will. I'll take over driving here by sharing my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
I'll have that pop up. Okay. Welcome everybody. Like Lori said, my name's Nikki. I'm with CanAssist. It's University of Victoria. I caught you there. You had Regina.
Oh,
no, we're local.
Oh, thank you for. Yeah, that's where I went to university.
Oh. There we go. So at UVic, we like to start with a territory acknowledgement. So acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen speaking peoples on whose the traditional territory the university stands, and that's the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. And I think that territory acknowledgement has become more and more relevant to us over this past few years as things are really coming into light. So it's meaningful to take it into account even when we're in a digital space. So a quick overview of CanAssist before we think, why is this young person talking about technology for seniors? Clearly she can't know what she's talking about. So I have an excuse. So a quick overview of CanAssist. So we're part of the University of Victoria, and we're focusing on coming up with sort of innovative solutions to address needs in the disability community. So that was really how CanAssist started, was taking sort of brilliant young engineering students and applying that expertise to really practical real world situations where you could help a person with a disability. So they started really focused on that front. So we're unique in North America, that relationship with the university. So we have a space on campus here, and we work with researchers and students, and it's a really collaborative setting. We are, I say we have a place on campus. We're mostly working remote now, but yeah, it's a team of about 25 different people. And my role with product development is really focusing on CanAssist technologies. So what we're actually building for people. And it focuses on innovation and unmet needs. So, we don't want to reinvent the wheel if it exists. So if there's something there that's already working, we're not gonna go there. We're just looking at unmet needs. So this device in the picture is the hitch lift. This was developed for seniors who use heavy duty walkers or lightweight mobility aids. They don't need a whole ramp thing set up. That's a very expensive vehicle modification, but physically lifting those mobility aids in and out of the car is just out of range. And it actually does impact what mobility aids people buy. They only buy ones that they can lift into the car, and thus it can restrict them from devices that they actually need or could benefit from. So the travel scoot that's in both of these pictures, really lightweight electric scooter, but even with being the lightest weight one you can find, it's been heavy to get in and out of the vehicle, especially because a lot of people who use it might have MS or a disability themselves, or it's being put on the spouse or caregiver. So CanAssist team worked on the hitch lift, which is hitch mounted like a bike rack, and it plugs in using the cigarette lighter. So you don't need to do any modifications to the vehicle. You can sell your car, put it on the next one. It works on a car instead of a big truck. So that was an example of kind of where we're focusing on unmet need. And there are other things out there that can help you lift a mobility aid into a car. But like I said, they are heavy duty and quite expensive. And one of them that was quite close to the hitch lift actually required you to put a heavy steel beam in place first, and then you could lift your mobility aid. So yeah, if you could lift the beam, you could probably lift the mobility aid. So why does it exist, right? So CanAssist is all focused on this collaboration, not competing. So we're not going to focus on somebody who's already addressing with a product. So we do sometimes find occasions where they will come to us from the community with an idea of, this is what I want to do, and this is the barrier we're facing. What do you have in mind? And sometimes there's something out there that's like a 90% fit, but it's not quite right for that person. So this product here is a really good example. The Go Dog Go ball launcher. It's a bucket, shoots a ball out when you press a button. And then ideally your dog is clever enough to put the ball back in the bucket. And if not, you should have a whole bunch of tennis balls on hand. And so it developed for children who had more complex care needs and wouldn't necessarily be able to touch the button on that remote, and certainly wouldn't be in a position to throw a ball for a dog. So the first one was actually made for a girl. She's the one on the left there, and it was for her to meet her dog, really. So she's got her hand on a big green button, and the modification that CanAssist did was to just take that remote that wasn't accessible and change it out for a big green button. And that makes the world of difference for her because suddenly she can use it. So that's more about the collaborative piece. So then there's this customized solutions focus. So really getting at what the person wants to do and how they're able to do it. So this is Charles. He had a stroke, no longer had use of his right side after 25 years of playing guitar. And we worked with him to develop a pedal power guitar strummer. So you can see his foot is on, it's actually a bass drum pedal. He presses down and this little pick comes up and down. So he can actually strum using his foot and he can play along on the other side. So that one's really sweet because we're focusing on quality of life. A lot of people who are involved in this sector are really focusing on things that just keep people alive and not necessarily keep them happy. And so this was something that was going to bring him a lot of joy. It's not exactly a great idea from a business standpoint because you need to then take your market and say who's only able to strum with one hand. And of those people, do they want to learn guitar? And for us, we actually did end up finding a lot of those people, but it's a very small market, but a very meaningful technology to have him back and playing music. And like I said, this technology developed for him ended up being used with other folks. So that's what we call with, we start with that customized solution. And it usually comes in the form of a request where somebody actually just comes to us and more verbalizes, or they put it through the form, you know, I no longer have use of this arm, would like to play guitar. What do you think? And we actually start by doing research to see what's out there, see if there is something. And then if there isn't, we have to pair the project with a funder. So if you're wondering, where does the money for all this come from? Philanthropy. We get money in kind from UVic, but most of our technology development happens from donations and grants. So it ended up being that the philanthropic donor paid for the development. We had a whole bunch of our engineers and co-op students from the university work on the solution. So then actually when Charles received it, he got it for free because something like this would probably be pretty expensive to prototype any other way. So our really successful customized technologies become what we call broad impact technologies. So that's something that can help a lot of people, a wide user group. So this is our captive knife cutting board. That's my grandma on the right, just as a side note. She actually has one of these cutting boards because like Charles, she had a stroke, so she doesn't have use of her left side. And so she can use a cutting board like this by mounting, say, a potato or something onto those spikes. They're just nails basically put in the from the other side. And then the knife actually moves along that bar so that you can kind of get the whole chopping and slicing method, but you only need one hand. So that's quite a simple technology, but again, it's addressing an unmet need. There's a lot of attempts to make something for one-handed chopping, but you'll see it ends up creating some pretty odd chopping situations. So there's one where the knife is held in the corner and you can kind of pivot around this, but you could imagine if you were trying to cut a carrot, you just cut it like a pizza. It didn't really take into account how we want to cut our food. Where this one was actually developed too in collaboration with an occupational therapist. You can see just there's a bit of a raised corner to it. And that was from the occupational therapist who'd suggested, how about for when people are trying to spread butter on their toast? They sometimes just chase it all the way down the counter. So that raised corner allows somebody to put a piece of toast in there and put butter or jam on the top, and it doesn't get away from them. So it's really taking that end user from start to finish. And it's dishwasher safe, including you can remove the knife using only one hand, which was exactly the purpose of this, because if that person only has one hand, it's not like they're suddenly going to have use of a second hand when it comes time to clean it, right? It's start to finish inclusion and participation in the kitchen. So that's one where we actually got funder to help us with the development of, I think, about 40 of them, and it annihilated our wait list, and it actually left us with a few leftovers. And I'm not sure if we have any left. But if you do know anyone where you think this is a good fit, we might actually still have some around. And if not, you can be on the next wait list. We do accept these community requests, and I'll tell you a bit more about that at the end. So then our projects have kind of worked across the spectrum of what we say, spectrum of age and spectrum of ability. So we work with folks who have developmental disabilities. We have folks who have acquired workplace injuries to help them get back to work, cognitive disabilities, all sorts of things that are just associated with aging in terms of maintaining independence. So we kind of got into this, well, we were involved before loosely, but we got a grant from the Ministry of Health for our Can Stay Home initiative. And this was all about building technologies to address these unmet needs as they relate to aging. So really trying to keep seniors in their own homes for longer, safely, support them, find out what the real challenges are, and start identifying some useful solutions. So the Can Stay Home project's been going on for quite a while, so that's why I'm able to have pictures of things that are actually out there and being used and being tested. On the right side is a bit of an example of Can Connect. It was a simplified video calling device that we worked on. And actually, funny story too, the Machosen Senior Resource Center, some folks did volunteer to give our engineers feedback on the design and ended up shaping the end product. So it's not that we're just a bunch of academic researchers doing things secretively on campus. We really do want to engage with the community. So of course, this was all before the pandemic. We were able to come in and meet with people and actually have them interact with what we were building. So the end result is a single purpose video calling device. So you can think almost like a digital picture frame, photos of different family members, and you just touch the photo and it makes the call. So it saves the drama of signing in, finding the icon, getting the password right and the username right. And it's just instead always there, always ready to go. And it has some features like automatic answer. And speaking of automatic answer, the other end of that spectrum, because of course the video calling relies on Wi-Fi, which we know people don't necessarily have. On the left side of the screen there is the caregiver intercom. So that's a box that actually plugs into a landline phone. And it helps somebody to get a hold of the person with the box without necessarily having them to pick up the phone. So, for example, my grandma wouldn't be able to get to the phone in time necessarily because of her mobility challenges. So it rings, and it's discouraging for her because she might not necessarily make it in time. So with the caregiver intercom, instead, it's the person who's calling who can put in like a little passcode and then speak directly from the box, like a big speakerphone call. And that's set up in advance, so it's secure. They have to put in a password, and it's only the people, because it has caller ID. So it's really only going with trusted people, but it allows that phone call to take place, which we found can be really useful in cases like where they're running a call program where volunteers are calling out to different seniors just to chat, really. But they have a system in place for, if she doesn't pick up the first time, we're going to call again in an hour. If she doesn't pick up then, we're going to call her daughter. If she still doesn't pick up, eventually it gets down to they usually contact the RCMP. I know the West Shore has the Keep in Touch program, which is pretty similar, but this allows for that extra step of, before you call the police, you can call through the caregiver intercom, and maybe you can actually get a hold of the person. Maybe you can find out that they're asleep. Maybe you can find out that they did have a fall and they're on the floor and they're able to have that conversation. So it creates that extra step, and really what it's the big picture of what it's doing is decreasing that worry, because phone calls can be like a big source of concern if somebody doesn't pick up the first time. And if you don't have any other ways to get a hold of them, it ends up being like quite a moment of panic. That one in the middle if you're wondering about that, that is a wandering redirect. So this was made for wandering associated with dementia. So you can imagine getting close to it. It's got a sensor, so it can see, somebody's approaching this. So the case it would be used in would be somebody wandering at night, often with a spouse. So the spouse is sleeping with one eye open to make sure that their loved one isn't just walking out the front door. And this device instead just kind of sits on the door. And when somebody approaches it, the screen lights up and it says, stop, it's nighttime, go back to bed. Really simple solution. It's not trying to lock anybody out. And for a lot of people, early stage dementia, that was enough for them to just, right, and go back to bed. And it had an additional feature too, where if they consistently tried, it would turn on a video. So you would record a video ahead of time and it would be, hi, sweetie, it's nighttime, please go back to bed. And then they're hearing it from that loved one. It's a little less scary. And sometimes, again, that's enough to get them to go back to bed. So these are the kind of things we're working on in isolation, and they're really early prototype kind of things. But part of what I wanted to talk about today in terms of applying technology for the purpose of independence is a bit more about the stuff that's already out there. So, I mean, I have questions in here, and I kind of thought, if we don't have questions at the end, we can always chat about this kind of stuff, because it helps me, particularly in my role. So, and I've asked these kind of questions before. Assistive technology, what comes to mind when you hear the word? And it's technology often evokes the thoughts of computers, robots, stuff of science fiction, and those things are, of course, technology, but technology is just machinery or equipment that's built with the application of science, which is very broad. And adding the assistive seems a bit unnecessary, right? If you're building something, shouldn't it be assistive? Shouldn't it help somebody? Because it was built with a purpose, right? But the addition of assistive tells us that the technology is intended to enhance learning, working, just daily living for people who are living with these challenges, living with disabilities, recovering from an injury, with certain medical conditions, and so on. So assistive technologies can be far more simple than robots. So first example, the shoehorn, a great piece of technology, a very simple piece of equipment to just help somebody who might have back pain to put on a shoe properly, not a terribly complicated thing. Assistive technology, of course, could extend all the way up to robots, but there's not a lot of great examples of that yet. So in terms of the more technical end, it's electronic devices. There's some apps too that can be really beneficial for people. And so second example, this is a simple day clock. So primarily beneficial for people who forget the time or date. Could be a cognitive disability, or it could just be that they're really enjoying retirement and have no idea what day of the week it is, because why would you? Work days don't matter anymore. And so it's just providing the time and the day in a really simple format. And so that's my whole thing with assistive technology. It does not need to be robots. It does not need to be complicated. Benefits of assistive technology, though. Why use assistive technology? And so I'm going to use a good West Coast analogy here with rain. And so, like challenges associated with aging, it's natural. There may even be some hidden benefits and beauty to it, but it can also be restrictive. We literally change our plans for the rain. We won't do certain activities if it's raining. And then how do you handle the rain? I mean, the first one is you could stay inside, and we do that sometimes. We just try to avoid it, and that works for a time. But many of us, without thinking it, do use a technology, a simple one, the umbrella. Yes. And that umbrella unlocks the outside world. It reopens activities, and it sometimes means we don't have to cancel those plans. We can go outside. And that's really similar to what assistive technology can do for addressing these challenges. Much like umbrellas, assistive technologies are not perfect. They can help with the rain, but there's a bit of wind and then suddenly they're not a good fit. And where an umbrella might work for one person, just like assistive technologies, they might not work for everybody. So, rain gear, the good Gore-Tex jacket holds up better in the wind, but that's also not for everybody. So it really is a journey of finding out what works for you. And the benefits of that can really be quite life-changing. So now I'm going to go backwards on my analogy and just change my mind about it entirely. Umbrellas are well known. They can be purchased virtually anywhere, and they are very cheap. Well, mostly. So that was one of the more fancy ones I found for $40. And unfortunately, assistive technology is not well known. A lot of stuff out there is brand new, or it's constantly changing. You can go into pretty much any store, it seems, when it's raining, and you can find an umbrella. Very hard to find assistive technologies. And umbrellas, you have a sense of how much they're going to cost, whereas with assistive technologies, it could go anywhere. Some of those apps are free. So on one end, they're very cheap. But on the other end, you can look at things that are being tens of thousands of dollars and pretty much everything in between. And that's where Ability 411 comes in. So this is a website that we operate at CanAssist. It's part of the Can Stay Home initiative. And this is meant to really address those things. So yeah, I'll roll into this. So kind of addressing the fact that those assistive technologies are always changing. We do some of the research. The assistive technologies are difficult to find. Our team finds them, and the prices are variable. Well, we're going to find the cheap ones, or we're going to find the ones that are just the best fit in relation to price. And so kind of what is Ability 411? Simply, it is a website. Unfortunately, there's no phone number associated with it yet. Someday, I hope. So on it, you'll find a lot of articles, questions about assistive technologies, and their well-researched answers. But unlike a lot of other websites with articles, you can directly submit your own question, and it will be received by a real human being who will receive, and so then you will receive a well-researched answer within this 2 to 3 business days, and it's free. And it's free because the website is designed to address this unmet need. One of the most common reasons that people are not using assistive technology is that they just had no idea what it is, or that something was out there. So like the umbrella, assistive technologies can help individuals to improve their quality of living or their independence. And for seniors in particular, this can play a vital role in helping them to stay at home for longer. And it's not just for seniors who use the website. We've got friends and families who submit on behalf of seniors. And the joke I like to make is that it's a great way to figure out what somebody wants for Christmas and find a Christmas gift that's coming up. Clinicians also, therapists, home support workers, community service workers, those people on the front line will submit their questions on behalf of seniors. And they don't necessarily have the time, they don't necessarily have the expertise to be identifying assistive technologies. So instead, the questions come to us, we do that work, and then they're able to bring it back to their client. So the question comes in, what is next? So the team at CanAssist has always been looking at assistive technologies. You'll remember from earlier when one of those requests comes in, the first thing we do is, we need to figure out if something already exists. There's no sense reinventing the wheel, right? So we have a pretty good understanding of what's out there, but that's not always enough. So we actually collaborate with the Canadian Association of Occupational Therapists on each answer. So we have some friends over at CAOT, and they're really knowledgeable about the services in our healthcare system. They know about these simple little strategies that can be used in place of technology or in addition to technology. So sometimes they just have really good strategies on hand. If somebody's you could say returning home from surgery, and they know they're going to have limited mobility for a short period of time. They might not actually want to be buying a mobility aid because it's a limited thing, but there are changes that can be made in the home. There are things you can buy from the dollar store. There are simple little things like that. And occupational therapists know that, but occupational therapy isn't always accessible to everybody. And so this really brings out some of those strategies and makes them more public, because these question and answers eventually turn into articles on the website. So the articles on the website are based on questions that people are actually submitting to us. And that makes the content, I think, a lot better and more real. And it should be said too that products are never endorsed by us. We're certainly not paid by anyone to talk up their products. Instead, we like to point out a few options, explain the differences of them, and send it back to the client so that they can make the choices from there. So you'll remember too, with the umbrella's strengths over assistive technology, it's well known, easy to find, fairly cheap. And so because assistive technologies are not well known and they're always changing, our team does the research and treats every question that comes in like, ooh, what's this? I wonder what's out there. And even if we got the same question 2 years ago, we're going to look at it again and see if anything's changed in that time. And because those assistive technologies are not easy to find, our team is, based in Victoria here, and we're serving British Columbians, so we're only looking at products that can be purchased in BC. And the internet is a very American place. They won't tell you. You just show up on a website and you realize everything is in US dollars. And Canadian sites usually like to label themselves with a .ca or something safe like that. But our team does look to make sure that we're not going to recommend anything that won't ship to Canada if we're talking about online things. But we do have a focus to find BC-based stores, retailers, or at least within Canada. And I mean, in an ideal situation, we get the detail of what city the client is in, and if we can say, oh, it's at Home Hardware, which is just down the road from you, that would be ideal. And I guess lastly, because assistive technologies are not necessarily cheap and the prices vary so much, our team attempts to find the best price for the product available if it's available from multiple retailers. And we try and find as many solutions as possible, including the cheapest options, so that you do have that range of understanding, like, okay, so if you want the one with all the bells and whistles, this is what it costs. But if you know that you didn't necessarily want the cheapest thing and you want something that'll last for a couple of years, we've got something right in the middle. So trying to get the Goldilocks option, if you will, not too cheap, not too expensive. So a couple examples of the kind of things that come in. This is what I like to call the problem without a solution. So Pamela just has difficulty navigating the tiny little buttons on her blouses and shirts due to arthritis, really common thing. She didn't necessarily think anything existed that could fix this problem. And we found a tool, $16 tool from Amazon that helps you put your button on, right? Very simple thing, a shoehorn of technologies. And I've never seen this thing before. Never seen this thing. And I was so excited to find it because I think it's just kind of one of those really simple things that could really help anyone at that time when you're putting on a shirt. So that was the problem without a solution. Now we've got the problem with a solution. This is another one that I got virtually every time I spoke at events, was jars. Jars are a very controversial thing, opening them, closing them. People will actually change what they buy based on whether or not they can open jars. And unfortunately, usually what most people will say if you have difficulty opening a jar is that you've probably seen something like one of those little rubber cloths. Maybe it looks like a sunflower, and you put it over the top and you actually still have to grip it. Or you've seen the thing that looks like a nutcracker and it grabs the top of it. And again, you still have to grip it. So they're all just other gripping solutions. This is a as seen on TV robo twist. So it just goes on top of the jar and you press the button and then it does the rest. So, maybe I spoke too soon. Maybe there actually are good examples of robots. Maybe there are some good ones out there. So And yeah, that's a $20 product from Canadian Tire. And it also works if you only have one hand. That's another good one. So again, it's a simple thing, but it's not necessarily something that people would be aware of. So an idea of, I think I need something to open a jar, but let's find one that probably involves the least gripping because we know that's going to be a specific challenge. And so this one is no problem, but a solution, which is a very rare question. Gary is interested in technology, especially interested in smart homes, but doesn't really know where to begin. And so these questions don't come in often, but when they do, we get to do a deep dive into them. So we recently got one about Lifeline products and Lifeline-like products, so similar ones, to look at what's really out there and gauge that. So smart homes. I was speaking at an event in Sydney, and I was lucky to have my grandpa in attendance. And I had this slide up and I said, does anyone in here have a smart home? And not a single hand went up. So I pointed at him and I was like, Grandpa, that's you. You have a smart home. I know because I set it up. And he just calls back from the audience being like, do I? And apparently he's been so comfortable with his smartphone or his smart home that he didn't actually realize that was what it was called. So smart home technology is kind of one of those huge things where I think there's a lot of talk about it, but not necessarily a lot of entry-level information on what is it and what can it do. They're neat little things, smart homes. They have a lot of different capabilities. I'll say up front that the downsides here are you need an internet connection in the home and you need to be comfortable with the speaker listening, and you need to be prepared for it to speak randomly when you don't expect it, and it might make you jump. Sometimes they think they heard you talk and then they respond and you think, who is this person in the room with me? So they're not a great fit for everybody. They're great, even without any of these fancy attachments. You can set alarms, you can listen to music, listen to the radio, set reminders, make a shopping list, all just using your voice. So you're talking to the speaker and it talks back. If you ask it to tell a joke or a fact, it will do that. So kind of nice to have that in terms of usability, because I know with computers, you kind of need to get used to this is what you need to do. You have to use the keyboard and you have to put this specific request out there. But this one, it just allows you to ask questions. So even if you don't know what it can do, you can just ask it. And then there's the ones with the fancy attachments. So that can be a big help for folks who have mobility challenges. So a major theme with falls among seniors is waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. And there's insufficient lighting. So I mean, ideally you have your handy dandy bedside light or something within reach. But you can get these smart light bulbs, so you can just ask this smart speaker to turn on the lights, and they can turn on all the lights that lead you to the bathroom, which makes it much more simple. And it also means you can be lying in bed and then ask for the lights to be turned off. Lighting is such a small thing, but it can be a big difference around falls, just to be aware of what's on the floor and how the height changes. There's a TV attachment, so you can ask it to play movies or TV shows. Outlets, so if you ever had the Christmas lights on a timer, it's a bit like that. You can set it to turn on and off at certain times. So I've heard of folks using that with a fan or a space heater, something that you might only want on for a little bit to do like a nice temperature adjustment on one of those hot or cold seasons. And it means you don't have to fiddle with it every time. And it really does go on. And I mean, this is one of those huge things where there's so much out there. It makes sense that you'd be a little bit like, wow, where do I start? So then we have the fourth type of question, the problem and no solution. So interesting problem. Question came in recently. It's not the first time I've come across it. And I'd love to tell you about all the great products available out there, but there really wasn't anything. And without getting too technical, the case here is Darla is worried about her husband with early stage dementia. They live in a remote area and he loves to go on nature walks. She's worried about if he gets lost or hurts himself, and she's looked at panic buttons and tracking devices, but there's no cell reception in the area. And so without getting too technical, there are devices for backwoods hikers to use safely. They can track movement, they can send updates, you can make calls, you can even request emergency help. And instead of using cell service, they use satellite. So it should work anywhere in the world, only they are definitely not made for seniors with dementia. They're complex. There's a good chance that the senior could turn it off, drop it, send out an emergency request by accident, because they are really complex pieces of technology. So what happens when there's a problem and there's no solution? That's an interesting one, because most of the stories that come to Ability 411 are about, problem and we found the solution. But it does happen too, where there's a problem and we don't find something. And that's actually when we cycle back to CanAssist Assistive Custom Technologies. So at that point, we can let the user know we didn't find anything. We might share some close calls, things that are near fits, but really noting like, these are the weaknesses. These are the reasons why you might not want it. But we always leave that door open to a customized solution. So bringing them into that community request process, saying like, this is really brilliant and it doesn't exist and it probably should exist. So come to us if you're interested and we'll see what we can do. And it of course has to align with funding and everything, but this takes me really nicely into my role with CanAssist, product development. And so I'm always looking for these kind of unmet needs, problems that don't have solutions, particularly when it comes to seniors. So that's the brilliant thing about Ability 411. People also send the hard questions, and that answer helps to inform our product development process. So it actually ends up being beneficial in return. So even if there isn't something out there, that question may have actually got the gears turning to make something happen. So it's not a lost cause to send in a tricky question. And then we get to my favorite part too, the challenges. So why aren't we all using assistive technology every day? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. So what I've largely found is four things. So the concerns, is it safe? Is a very common and reasonable question to ask, particularly if people are looking at mobility aids, those smart home things, if it has attachments to security. And I think too, with a lot of the digital world, it's about privacy too. Is that speaker listening to me? If you have concerns about safety when it comes to assistive technology, definitely reaching out to an occupational therapist if you can to assess the situation is definitely one of the best things to ensure safety, just because they are absolutely the experts and they can really work directly one-on-one with the person. And then two, for the privacy piece, buying an assistive technology online can even feel risky just when you're putting in a credit card number and you're seeing it on the screen looking back at you. And maybe you don't even feel comfortable with the idea of the speaker listening. So everything's kind of a trade-off, right? We always are sharing a little bit of privacy to get a little bit of convenience in return. And if privacy is really important to you, I would recommend bringing those concerns to a retailer first. Somebody who really knows the product, ideally somebody who's not trying to make a sale, somebody who just knows it. And also just, your trusted friends to start that conversation. So concerns. Number 2 is learning. So if privacy wasn't the reason not to get the smart home, it's usually this one. It's frustrating with technology. Things don't always work properly. And part of learning new technology is just knowing when the technology is the problem and it's not you. A lot of people get stuck in that cycle of thinking, what am I doing wrong? And it's not you. You're not the thing that's wrong. It really is the technology. And that's part of the learning process, hence why it is frustrating. So there are a lot of fun ways to address this if you're interested. I mean, I'm sure there are programs to help seniors to learn more technology. Some are paid, so you're really lucky if you can find one that's free, or some have the membership fee. That's really fun. Sometimes you learn from a pro, sometimes you can learn from a university student, sometimes it's from another senior who also just learned how to use it. I actually think that one's the best because they understand where you're coming from. And sometimes you can be that person for someone else too. You can be the one who explains this is how it works. So Learning is a barrier, and then cost. Like I said, with it being so expensive, it's no wonder that cost is a big barrier. If it's addressing a really specific need, it makes sense because there might not be a big market for it, so it ends up being expensive. But there are funding options out there. They are very complex to navigate on your own. So BC government and federal government, they have some tax incentives, they have some different funding pathways. There's condition-specific grants. So like the MS Society has some, I think, funds to help to purchase assistive technology and equipment. And so we have some information on Ability 411 for those funding pathways. And it's something that we have started kind of doing, is trying to help navigate those systems when we send the response. So if somebody is clearly indicating, I need this thing and I'm a low-income senior, we're trying to package those two. Here's the things that might work, and here's some things you can look into to be able to afford it. Lastly, stigma. So in a perfect world, walking with a mobility aid would be seen like walking with that umbrella. So it's a tool that addresses a challenge and helps to open the world up. But a lot of people hesitate around assistive technology because it's stigmatized, and they often want to wait. And I think historically, we've just seen assistive technology as something that you are dependent on. And slowly we're coming to see that assistive technology actually enables independence. And that entire change is driven by people who choose to rethink their own independence and experiment with these kind of technologies and learn how to use them, and then share that learning with others. So I hope that your takeaway from today will be this shift from I am dependent on this device to I am independent with this device. And so your practical takeaways for involvement, if you're feeling impassioned after this, I encourage you to submit any interesting questions to Ability 411 or explore the solutions out there. I did hear from one woman who was a cane user, and she went on the website, and one of the recently asked questions was about canes, and she was like, I'd never even thought of that. So she didn't even go on with a particular idea in mind. She just started to stumble across things that could be helpful. Periodically, we also look for seniors to test some of our Can Stay Home technologies. I think I might talk to Lori about some of those to see just kind of when the opportunities arise. We do love to get real world feedback on what works and what doesn't. And spread the word. We do receive those community request forms all the time, and we work across the that spectrum of age and ability. So if you think there's someone in your life who might benefit from one of these custom solutions, we do accept those community requests, and those are always paired with philanthropic funding. So yes, and then finally, from time to time, we just seek general feedback on an idea. That's really me and my product development team. And that's more, we're looking for feedback, ideas, thoughts, just general complaints about what makes life hard. And that helps us to identify those challenging areas and see if we can come up with something to address unmet needs. And with that, I am done. Thank you very much for your time. And absolutely, if you want to do questions or if you just want to talk, I am very interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you.